companies, they would call me a chief of staff. My role is more like an investment strategist who would assist the chief investment officer by that time to design, implement various investment strategies, and as well as to do a total portfolio performance monitoring, both for the listed and unlisted investments. I was also tasked to maintain what we call strategic investment partnerships, both locally and internationally. And I was also tasked with maintaining what we call the investment balance scorecard. So I would monitor what is happening in both listed investment unity. Chief of staff, but we have resorted to use executive assistant.
Sorry, but how would that function relate to the executive heads and departments? Are you a monitor of them? Because that seems to be a bit of an odd portfolio to sit at the top in relation to the executives. I would have thought your CEO would relate directly to the executives on those matters. Are you a super monitor?
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you for the question. There's a lot of guys, when we explain to them we are executive assistant, they will keep on asking, are you a PA or are you a super monitor? Are you above executive heads? It's a difficult, probably, position to explain, but the position is very similar. I'm an assistant to the CEO, so most of the responsibilities that are entitled to the CEO, I would assist him. I don't want to equate to the assistant to the commissioner, but I'm saying I assist the CEO in his or her duties, which includes mainly strategy, implementation of a strategy, monitoring that strategy, and also reviewing that strategy.
So it could be maybe likened to a DG in the president's office or a DG in a premier's office?
Correct.
Would you say that?
Correct.
Yeah.
What would your relationship be to the heads of department?
So my
EXCO?
So my relationship to the heads of department would be mainly on coordination. I would, from time to time, discuss with them the strategy, where they are, request information on their performance, discuss that performance with the executive heads, which I will also discuss with my superior, and find ways where we can adjust that strategy. So my relation is mainly monitoring, coordination with executive heads. I can also say that I'm a permanent invitee of all ESCO meetings and ESCO committees, and as well as some of the board subcommittees.
So you are the man of the moment. You're in all these meetings, and you're monitoring all of that, of what happens there. So the effectiveness and the coordination, given some of the evidence we've had of EXCO, if you're a permanent member there, you would have access to what is coming to EXCO, help plan the EXCO agenda for the CEO. You would know what is in and what's out of the EXCO. Is that correct? What's on the agenda of EXCO would be part of your responsibilities for the CEO?
From time to time, we discuss the agendas of ESCO with him, and I will provide my inputs as an assistant, but I don't have a final say. The final say will lie with the Chief Executive Office. But from time to time, I have to put my input in the agenda and what will be discussed. And I also discuss what will be discussed in those committees prior to those meetings as an assistant. Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Then I'll go to my educational qualifications. I have a Bachelor of Commerce Honors degree in Finance, which I obtained from National University of Science and Technology. I got a Master's in Finance and Investments from University of Witwatersrand. I got a certificate in Accelerated Supervisory Development from University of South Africa. I got also an advanced certificate in Common Law, which I obtained from University of Witwatersrand. And I'm also a PIC FIRES representative with RE 1, 3, and 5 in accordance to FSCA certification.
Sorry, can I ask you just one question? Which other boards do you sit on?
Currently, on behalf of as a PIC representative, through you, Commissioner, I sit on SA Home Loans. I also sit on Royal Bafokeng Properties, S&S Refinery, and also a subsidiary of SA Home Loans called South African Housing Development Fund.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, I'll go on the paragraph 4 where I'm describing the background to my statement today. So I've been requested, this was a request from the Commission, that I should present a statement that details the investment by PIC into the S&S Refinery, a company that is registered in accordance to the Mozambican laws. And this statement will cover only details as it relates to my role in the transaction as a PIC representative on the board of S&S Refinery. On paragraph 5, Commissioner, I'm just giving a brief description of the company called S&S Refinery. The S&S Refinery is a palm oil refinery and saponification plant that is based in Nacala, Nampula province in Mozambique. So Nampula is in the northern part of Mozambique, and Nampula is the provincial city, and the company is located in Nacala. The plant refines and saponifies palm oil to produce refined palm oil, soap, and stearin. The plant is located in a parcel of land with an area of approximately 10 hectares. The plant is strategically located closer to both the national road and approximately 9 kilometers from Nacala Port. On paragraph 6, the PIC invested 63 million United States dollars into the company, and this was split as 28 million US dollars as equity and $35 million as senior debt. So the PIC, on behalf of Government Employee Pension Fund, now owns 70% of the company's equity. And the PIC initially approved the investment into the company on the 8th of October 2014. The total project was then funded by local banks, being Millennium Beam, Moza Bank, Nosso Banco. And I'll term this as Mozambican banks as I go through the statement. With the majority of senior debt of 40 million US dollars, and PIC contributing USD 35 million US dollars as senior debt, and the balance was equity, which was split between PIC and the local partner. To my knowledge, Commissioner, the transaction was done in accordance with the client mandate to invest in the rest of the continent. At the time, PIC recently obtained the mandate to invest on the rest of the African continent, and Mozambique was identified in the PIC Africa strategy to be one of the key countries to invest in. I will discuss this later, why Mozambique was so attractive when we invested at that time. Then the transaction was also in line with the PIC strategy of working with local partners, investors, financiers, and also it had a developmental impact. So at the time when the transaction was done, my role in the office of the Chief Investment Officer by then, among other responsibilities, was to assist in the development of the Africa strategy, coordination and implementation of the strategy in accordance with the client's mandates. And the S&S Refinery transaction was one of the first few direct investment transactions in the rest of Africa within developmental investment portfolio. I was therefore part of the transaction team that worked on the S&S transaction.
Just a question. So when the PIC has got a new strategy or a new mandate, like this one, does it communicate it to the broader investment community to know and bring opportunities, or is just kept within the PIC?
Thank you, Commissioner. To my knowledge, I think there was a lot of noise around 2010, 2011, when the GPF announced that they were going outside South Africa. Though this was not the first time that the GPF have invested outside South Africa, because one of the first funds that they invested was the Harith Fund Managers that got the mandate to invest in the infrastructure investments. But in 2010, 2011, that's where there was explicit strategic asset allocation to invest in the rest of the continent. And once you get the mandate from the client, then the work of the PIC is to develop a strategy to implement that that strategy, or that mandate that you got from the client. If I remember very well, there was an announcement where PIC is shown that they've now begun to invest in the rest of the continent. And I know in 2012, I attended a private equity conference in Accra, where by then the chief investment officer had to make a big presentation to a crowd of different investment partners across the continent that we do have a 5% allocation to invest in Africa. So this was made public. And also in our annual report, it is very clear that we have the mandate to invest in the rest of the continent.
Yeah, and was that made locally too, with the local professionals to know and bring transactions to the PIC?
I'm not sure if it was communicated. I'm not sure about that, but what I'm very sure about is we did communicate in our annual report.
All right, okay, thank you.
So on paragraph 10, right? Okay, I was part of the investment team that worked on the transaction, and my role initially was in relation to the transaction was limited to attending meetings with sponsors, due diligence, providing input in structuring, valuations, negotiations, review of reports by external due diligence providers, negotiations with senior debt lenders, which are termed local Mozambican banks, negotiating with promoters, sponsors, and advisors. And at that time, we were dealing mainly with BDO Maputo. And I would also want to state on paragraph 11 that there was a subsequent transaction that was done on S&S Refinery, which I will discuss later. And I would want to state that I was not involved in any subsequent additional follow-on investment of USD 10 million in S&S Refinery. But however, I was aware of the transaction as the non-executive director of the company. And then the investment team was composed of the following individuals, and Commissioner, I have provided the table with different individuals that were involved in the transaction and were augmented by external experts. So from the PIC team, there was a senior fund principal at that time, and his name was Mr. Roy Rajda, and he was the lead. He played the lead role, and he provided guidance and inputs in the transaction investment process, from origination, negotiations, valuations, structuring, and closing of the transaction. You also led the negotiation with the sponsors, banks, advisors, and engagement with due diligence service providers. And I must also say Mr. Roy Rajda is my colleague from the PIC, and I sit with him on the board of S&S Refinery. And then there was Mr. Paul Magula. By that time, he was the associate fund principal working in the Isibaya division. He led and performed the financial modeling, due diligence, assessment of valuations, review of due diligence reports from external experts. He also later performed credit risk analysis of the transaction. And then there was the chief economist from the PIC chief economist, who by the time was called Mr. Elikane Maroge. He performed the market study, economic assessment of potential demand and supply of palm oil in northern Mozambique, and he also did country analysis. And then there was an investment analyst called Mr. Imran Mia, who also assisted with due diligence, transaction administration, and implementation of the transaction, including ensuring disbursement. And then there was Mr. Tsepo Rapudi, who also performed the financial modeling, due diligence, also assisted with administration and implementation of the transaction, including ensuring disbursement. And then the PIC legal team also was part of the transaction, and by that time it was led by Mr. Nesane, who performed internal review of legal due diligence reports review of transaction agreements, providing comments and attending meetings with sponsors, advisors, as well as the Mozambican banks. And then the team, the PIC internal team was supported by technical experts, and the technical experts were Mott McDonald, who performed the technical due diligence, and then the financial experts were Ernst & Young, who performed the financial due diligence, including valuations. And then the legal experts were Sao Cadeira of Mozambique, which were supported by the CDH of South Africa, and they performed the legal due diligence, including drafting and negotiations of CTA with local banks. And then after the transaction was approved, Mr. Rohit Rajda, who is now the executive head of impact investing, and myself were appointed as the PIC representative on the board of S&S Refinery as non-executive directors. Commissioner, on paragraph 14, I'll start to discuss how the transaction, according to my knowledge, came to the PIC and how it was originated. So I was first made aware of the transaction by Mr. Rohit Rajda, who by the time was the senior fund principal in development and investments, and currently Mr. Rohit Rajda is executive head of impact investing. I was informed by Mr. Rajda that the proposal, which was in the form of hard copy, came through the Chief Investment Officer's office. By that time, it was Dr. Daniel Machila. And Mr. Rajda informed me that he was provided with the contact details of a company called India Frec Trade and Investment Private Limited, which I will continue to term it as India Frec, as project sponsors. And the person that was the contact person there was Mr. Siabonga Nene. Mr. Rajda invited me to attend with him the meeting of with India Frec. The meeting was held in one of the boardrooms at the PIC offices at number 41 Matrusberg, Menlo Park in Pretoria. This meeting was held in around early mid-February 2014. I don't have the exact dates, but it was around February 2014.
Sorry, at the time that you were, well, this was taking place, who was the Minister of Finance?
Through you, Commissioner, to my knowledge is at that time in February 2014, Mr. Nene was the Deputy Minister of Finance and the Chairman of the PIC board.
And probably Mr. Gordon was the minister, the finance minister. Is that correct?
I'll check that, but I know that Mr. Nene was the Deputy Minister by that time.
Sorry. And did you at that time know that Siabonga Nene was the Deputy Finance Minister's son?
Through you, Commissioner, it was my first time to meet Mr. Siabonga Nene, and I didn't know at that time he was the son of Mr. Nene, who was the Deputy Minister of Finance by that time.
Didn't the names make you ask?
Through you, Commissioner, they rhymed. But out of a professional, I couldn't ask him in the meeting. But subsequently, I did have a chat with my colleague, and he did confirm, indeed, he was the son of Mr. Nene, who was the Deputy Minister of Finance by that time.
At the outset, you knew that?
In the meeting, I guessed.
In the meeting, you guessed, but then from then on, you actually checked and you knew that this was a family member. It's not a trick question. I mean, it's simply a question of saying, yeah, obviously there's a Nene 1 and a Nene 2. Yes. I mean, you know, you just assumed, yes, it is, and you were conscious of that. You were aware of it. Yes or no? Yes, no.
After the meeting, then I knew. Yes. Okay. Then I was on paragraph 18. So in the meeting, no, 17, sorry. Okay. So now we're in the meeting, then Mr. Miza and Mr. Siabonga Nene, representing their jointly company called India Frec, were present at the meeting. And then in the meeting, Mr. Meza introduced Indiafric as the company that is registered in South Africa and is involved in various business interests, including cement manufacturing. The company registration details at the time indicated that Mr. Meza and Mr. Nene were directors of the company. Then Mr. Amir Meza, who I have later discovered was of an Indian nationality, presented the investment opportunity to us to invest alongside Indiafric in an edible palm oil project in Nacala, Mozambique, which was promoted by Mr. Momade Rasurahim. Mr. Momade Rasurahim was the project promoter and owner of the project in Mozambique. He is a well-known Mozambican businessman who has interest in various business ventures. He speaks Portuguese, Hindi, Urdu, with extremely limited understanding of English. So during the presentation, Mr. Meza seemed to have a good understanding of the transaction he was presenting. He was so passionate about the proposed transaction. Mr. Nene did not contribute much to the presentation. He was quiet throughout the meeting, saying nothing except a greeting. In the meeting,
Just to check something, Mr. Rahim and Mr. Mirza, were they Mozambican? Or were they from India? Do you know?
okay, through you, Commissioner. So, Mr. Meza, as they presented to us, he was a business partner of Mr. Siabonga Nene, and jointly they owned a company called Indiafric that approached us with a proposal to invest in a company that Mr. Momad Rasu, who is a Mozambican, has been promoting. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, and Mr. Miza, was he a local or Indian? You said Indian descent. Is he from India or what?
Through Commissioner, so what I picked up from the CIPC document, he was an Indian he was of Indian nationality, Mr. Meza. And Mr. Momad Rasurahim is a Mozambican. So in the meeting on paragraph 22, so in the meeting, Mr. Meza concluded by inviting us to travel with them to Nacala, Mozambique, to perform planned site visits the following day. He even offered to arrange a chartered plane to fly us to Nacala the following day. We did not accept this request as it was not in line with our travel policy, and we made this known to him. Then later in the meeting, it was eventually agreed that we should later arrange to go to Nacala, Mozambique, to see the plant is presented. In around late February 2014, we traveled to Nacala. Mr. Rohit Rajda, who was the senior fund principal at that time, Mr. Paul Magula, who at the time was the associate principal in Isibaya division, reporting to Mr. Rohit Rajda, Mr. Amir Meza from the Indiafric, and Mr. Siabonga Nene of Indiafric, and myself traveled to Nacala, Mozambique through Nampula Airport.
Can I stop you there? At this point in time, did the PIC have a policy on politically exposed persons or not?
Okay, through you, Commissioner, to answer that, I have to check. But I would like to, my recollection is the PEP policy should have been developed, I think, around 2015, 2016 within the PIC. Because I remember at that time in 2014, we didn't have a specific department called ESG team in 2014. And I remember we were still refining the process within the unlisted investments. And I don't remember if we had the politically exposed policy within the PIC. But however, during the DD, in case people, the investment team would look at ESG issues, including politically exposed people, if they have influence or if there's any problems with them that could hinder us to do business with them. On paragraph 25, on the following day, a meeting was held at S&S refinery offices in Nacala We were introduced by Mr. Amir Mirza to the project promoter, who is Mr. Mohammad Rasul Rahim, his wife, Ms. Saidata Rasul. We were told that Ms. Saidata was a business partner in the S&S refinery, and Ms. Saidata, from my recollection, she speaks both Portuguese and English. We were then later introduced to a very big team of experts, specialist engineers from a company called Ayok Fabricon in India, some local engineers, and some from Belgium, from a company called Desmet Balastra Group. Commissioner, I was impressed with the enthusiasm and the professional conduct of the engineers who were working on the project. And the engineers took turns to explain to us how the plant was designed, constructed, and configured.
Can I stop you there? Can you just tell me, is it normal for the PIC deal team to go to a far-off country at origination stage?
Okay. Through you, Commissioner, it is very normal. You know, in investments and investment professionals, and worse, in a territory that you're not used to, you want to have a few in touch. Otherwise, you might be sold, you might end up buying something that does not exist. So before we even attempted to go and think about investing in this transaction, I thought it was prudent for us to go and see the plant, that indeed what was being presented by the sponsors was correct. So it's very normal that during origination, the investment team, from time to time, go and do some site visits.
Let's follow up there. So, was PM1, unlisted there at that time, or should this have gone through PM1 first to authorize the trip and everything?
Okay, through you, Commissioner, PMC1
was around at that time. I mean, wouldn't this have gone first to them to authorize the spending, to travel and all that?
Okay. Through you, Commissioner. So this was still at origination stage. Commissioner, also bear in mind, this was one of the complex first transaction by the team in the rest of the continent. We didn't want to take chances. I think by that time we have heard stories of big companies that have flown 4 or 5 hours to Nigeria to invest in some companies that does not exist, and the money was gone. So we wanted to make sure that
I understand. No, I just wanted to check whether was a process sort of laid out in terms of the African investments that you need to go through PMC first and all that. Was there a process during that particular time?
Through you, Commissioner, at that time, I don't remember, and I don't know if there is what is called origination process. But when you are originating transaction, you do a lot of things. You meet sponsors, either at their offices or at PIC offices. We are trying to establish if there's a transaction. And part of establishing whether there's a transaction, they might invite you to come and see the asset. So this process, it was still under the origination strategy. There's no deal now at the moment. We are still testing whether there should be a deal or not. So part of that was to go and see the asset which was being presented by the sponsors.
But who would give you the go-ahead to go and view what is called the project?
Okay, so ordinarily this will go, at that point, all of us will get authorization from the Chief Investment Officer for us to travel there.
And did you take any of your own engineers?
Okay, through your Commissioner, at that moment, we didn't take any independent engineers. That process followed after we got permission to go on deeper DD after PMC1.
And did the PIC take an interpreter with them, a translator for them? I see here you just read out on your statement that there was Ms. Saidata, who was a business partner in SS Refinery. who speaks both Portuguese and English. Did the PIC from its side take a translator or interpreter with them?
Okay, through you, Commissioner. Okay, through you, Commissioner. I think most of all the investment team by that time, we had a very limited understanding of Portuguese, and you see when I discuss later, it's a serious issue when you go to the countries where English is not the first language. But when we went to Mozambique, one of the sponsors, Mr. Amir Meza, he was very fluent in English as well as Hindi, and I'm not sure if it is Hindi or Urdu. So you could discuss issues with the sponsor in Hindi or Urdu, and then you could interpret. And then the interpreter from Portuguese to English, by that time when we went, it was the wife of the sponsor, whom I call Miss Sadata Raso, because she could speak English and Portuguese at that time. And on paragraph 26, just describe what I saw. I was impressed with what I witnessed. I could term the plant, though I'm not an engineer, from what I witnessed, the plant was well built and by experienced international engineers from Ayok Fabricon, an international engineering and large-scale plant engineering construction company, which is based in India. The equipment that were used were of high quality, which were sourced from reputable equipment suppliers from Belgium, the Desmet Ballastra Group, which is a company which is a world leader in the fields of engineering and supply of equipment. And then, Commissioner, when we visited the plant was near completion. It was around 80 to 90% complete. And then during the visit, apart from the plant site visits, we also had an opportunity to visit various other business ventures the local partner was involved in Nacala and surrounding areas. And we stayed in Nacala for 2 days. So, Commissioner, from paragraph 29, here now I discuss the investment process now that was followed on this transaction. So after the initial visit, so when we were doing the origination, the transaction team was assembled to have a deeper look into the transaction. So based on the desktop review, discussion with the sponsors, various engineers, management and plant site visits, so the PIC investment team felt that the proposed transaction required further investigation for a possible PIC investment. Then to my knowledge, the investment followed the PIC investment process, and it was approved in accordance to the approved process and delegation of authority at that time. So the following process was followed. So the first one was PMC1, the scoping report. The investment team developed the scoping report to be presented to PMC1. I also contributed to the compilation of the scoping report, and it was fitting that we all compiled the scoping report as we had first-hand site visit of the project. Then on the 18th of March 2014, the scoping report was presented to the Portfolio Management Committee on Listed Investments, which I will term as PMC1, and the PMC approved the transaction to undergo due diligence. And I have attached to this as Annex A, the PMC submission. Then the initial proposal by that time, what was proposed in the PMC1 was, it entails that the PIC participation in the transaction to acquire 50% of S&S refinery by the consortium that was comprising of the PIC and IndiaFrac Trade and Investment, and that we'll call them the consortium or edible oil consortium, for a total consideration amount of United States dollars of 29.25 million. So IndiaFrac Trade and Investment requested to be funded by PIC for their portion of shareholding in S&S refinery. And then And then we went to the due diligence process after the PMC1. So after the PMC1 approval, due diligence process began in around mid-April 2014. So we traveled again to Nacala, Mozambique, and then a full transaction team, including myself, traveled to northern Mozambique in a fact-finding mission for the second planned site visit. So as part of the due diligence process, Mr. Paul Magula, Mr. Elekane Maroge, Mr. Rohit Rajda, Mr. Imran Mia, and myself traveled to Nacala. And then on this trip, we were again joined by the project sponsors in the Africa, by that time, which was Mr. Amir Miza and Mr. Siabonga Nene.
Sorry, can we just go back slightly? Of the 29.25 million that was required according to 3.1.2, how much of that was PIC funding of the India FREC?
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Through you, Commissioner. So when the sponsors approached us, they were asking that we partner together as a consortium to buy 50% of this plant. But they didn't have the capital for them to invest in. So they said, can you fund us? And then we become partners into this consortium to buy into the India FREC. That was the initial transaction. And the basis in which they were coming in, one was saying, can you be your local partner, like your BE partner, in this transaction when we invest into the rest of the continent? So we were going to fund half of the 29.5 to the India FREC.
Just for clarity, what was supposed to be purchased? Was it the refinery, the plant or project, or was it a share? And then PIC and India FREC would then club together to buy a share. Is that what it is? Or shares?
So the initial proposal was the subscription of shares into this project of 50%. Yes.
So meaning that the PIC offered that 29.25 million into a vehicle, and that vehicle was like 100% funded by the PIC, but it was 50-50 shareholding, isn't it? Yeah. And that vehicle then used that money to purchase a 50% stake in that company. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Did that actually happen, or is this the initial proposal? Because your initial question was that the money spent was more than this. So this was the initial proposal, or was this actually implemented in this way?
Okay. So this was the initial proposal. So you'll find out when I go through the statement what happened subsequent to this.
Yeah. Just a question there is that, so that roughly $30 million, was it injected in the business, or it was a share sale, meaning that the promoter took the money away?
It was a share subscription, and partly was to finalize the 10 to 20% completion of the plant. So if you recall that, I've mentioned that when we came in, the plant was about 80 to 90% complete. So partly was to pay down.
To complete, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then partly the project promoter, who was Mr. Mohammed Rasul by that time, he had borrowed some funds in his personal capacity as a shareholder's loan and put in a shareholder's loan into the project. So partly that money was going to go to his shareholder's loan repayment as well.
To repay his shareholders' loans?
Yes.
And also to fund the business to complete that project?
Yes.
So roughly, what were the amounts? Out of that 30 million, what was the amount to complete the project and the amounts to repay the shareholders' loans?
Okay.
Or are you coming there?
Yes.
Are you coming there? Okay.
through you, Commissioner. I think if I go through, this was the initial rough
Initial thing.
proposal.
Which never been-
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of things happened.
Yeah, maybe let's wait for you and then we see how
Then
it
we can
goes.
discuss
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. So then we went through to the due diligence process. Then after the PMC1 approval, due diligence process began around mid-April 2014. I think I've gone through that. I'll go to 31.33. Okay, the due diligence scope covered the financial, technical, commercial, operational, and sponsor assessment. Then the financial, technical, and legal due diligence were outsourced to experts. Ernst & Young, they did the financial and valuation due diligence. Mott McDonald's, they did the technical, those are the engineers. Then Sauka Dairy attorneys in Maputo, working with Cliff Decker Home Fair, CDH. They performed the legal due diligence. And the local banks as well, the Mozambican banks, who were already invested in the project by that time, also performed their own independent valuations. So the technical experts were also conducted their own site visits of the plant in Nakara, Mozambique during the due diligence phase. We all performed the physical plant site visits with the assistance of various engineers at the plant. We also performed physical market site visits in Nakala and surrounding areas to assess the potential demand and supply of cooking oil. Mr. Elikana Maroge, who by the time was the PIC chief economist, performed the analysis and review of the economy, northern Mozambican region economy, and potential demand and supply of the refined cooking oil. And then my role in the due diligence process was to provide and contribute inputs in reviewing findings and reports by external outsourced experts, contributing in negotiations with other senior lenders, the local banks, engagements with promoters, advisors, which were the BDO Mozambique, and the analysis of the financial model. And then Mr. Paul Magula was responsible for leading in developing the financial model, assumptions, and valuations. And Commissioner, everyone in the team contributed in the development of the financial model and valuations of the project, scoping report and review of the due diligence reports from the experts.
Can I just take you back to 3137? We all performed physical plant site visits with the assistance of various engineers at the plant. Are we saying that the engineers were those who were working on the plant and the PIC did not have an independent engineer review or assessment?
Thank you. Through you, Commissioner, we had our own technical experts and engineers from Mott McDonald's. And over and above that, we didn't only rely from the independent, we also went with the assistance of the resident engineers to go and see what was being discussed in the proposal. So we have independent reports that were done by Mott McDonald's, who were the qualified engineers, but over and above that, we also went and have our own site inspection of the plant. Then on 31.4, Commissioner, that was the PMC2 approval process. So after the DD, we came out with the result of that DD. It was positive, and then we presented on the 7th of August 2014. The project was tabled to PMC Unlisted Investment for recommendation to Priority Sector Small Medium Enterprises Fund Investment Panel, which approved the investment of USD 62.5 million, which was split as 44 million senior debt and USD 18.5 million equity on August 2014. And I've attached the Annexure B PMC2 submission. And then we took the transaction after the approval by PMC2 to the Priority Sector Small Medium Enterprise Fund Investment Panel, which approved an investment of USD 62.5 million, which was split as USD 44 million senior debt and USD 18.5 million equity. Subsequent to this approval, some Mozambican banks agreed to partake in the senior loan funding. This led to PIC funding decreasing from 62.5 million to 53 million, which was made up of USD 35 million debt in 18 million equity. This amended structure was approved by PMC FIP, and it was around 20 March 2014. And I've attached the Annex C as the FIP submission. And then I'll do on 31.5, so during the negotiation, there were many iterations from the initial transaction structure, which resulted to various factors such as negotiation, change in shareholding, co-funding partner requirements, the Mozambican Central Bank regulations. So that's why there was this change of the initial transaction that was brought in to a new structure. And for example, PIC could not fund IndiaFrag, subsequently we couldn't fund IndiaFrag because PIC did not apply the BE policy for investment outside the country. Thereafter, then Mr. Rasu, who was the Mozambican local partner, he agreed to fund Mr. Meza for his portion, but subsequently discussion fell through, which again affected the structure. And also initially the banks had funded Mr. Rasu on his personal capacity, and therefore this would have reflected as a shareholder's loan on the balance sheet. However, the banks later changed their position to become directly a lender in the business, given that the transaction had occurred several years. I cannot fully recollect all the changes which culminated to the final structure.
Can I come in here? Initially, did the PIC, when the transaction came to the PIC earlier on in the year, was the PIC aware that they could not apply the BEE policy for this particular investment? Before it went to the PMCs, when the transaction came in, as it was with Mr. Meza and Nene as business partners, and approaching the PIC for funding, did the PIC not know at that particular time that the BEE policy would not apply to this investment?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So when the transaction was brought by IndiaFrag, they came in as, they were asking us to fund them as their South African counterparts, as a BE partner to invest in the rest of the continent. If my recollection is correct, by that time we had just got an approval of our Africa investment strategy implementation. I think it was around 2012, 2013. We didn't have, to my recollection, we didn't have a policy of investing transformation transactions outside South Africa. So there was no basis for us to fund IndiaFrag as a BE or as a BE partner for the PIC to invest in the rest of the continent.
But, sorry, but was IndiaFrag aware of this particular stance with the PIC before they took PIC to Mozambique, or not?
No, we were both unsure about it, and we never informed them that we couldn't fund them. But after we have gone, when we were in the scoping stage, after the scoping stage, that's where we realized that we could not fund them as a BE partner, and therefore we communicated with them that we cannot fund them in this transaction. But if they want to partner with us, we would be very glad to partner with them, but they were supposed to go and fund their own funding.
If we looked at 3154 and Mr. Meza coming to the PIC with various other projects, but if I understand that correctly, that would have been through a different company. How did you relate to the question that you come to the PIC on the one hand with one company and on the other hand with another company? Did that raise any questions for you?
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Through you, Commissioner, but I haven't read through 31.54. Can you, if Commissioner, you can allow me to go through it, and then I can answer the question? Okay. So, the first thing I'm saying, I was not involved in on the facilitation fee negotiation with Meza. I was not directly involved, but however, I'm aware that during the the S&S transaction negotiations, we became aware of other projects that were being promoted by Mr. Rasu with the assistance of Mr. Meza. So he was promoting. There were other projects that we thought it was of interest by that time. There was one, a hotel transaction, a Klinger plant transaction, and a cement plant transaction. Then Mr. Meza indicated that you could facilitate first right of refusal and co-investments rights to these projects, provided you could be compensated for this and for facilitating PIC investments in the Palm Oil project. Mr. Meza was then paid a fee of about 1.7 million United States dollars for facilitating the transaction to his company, Z International Trade and Investment. This fee was approved by the PSSME FIP. And
Can you just explain on what amount, percentage-wise, was this 1.7 million based on?
The amount was 1.5%, if I can remember, and it was calculated on the total project fee, on the total project cost.
Which project?
So it was calculated on the project cost, the S&S refinery project cost.
The Mozambique project.
Correct.
But how does that relate to the company that comes to you, India Frec, and you pay a different company for doing the same job with a different partner by the looks of it? I mean, because India Frec had two components, Mr. Meza and Mr. Nene, and then the payment was made to Zaid International. I just want to understand how one company comes with a proposal and another company is the one that's paid the fee.
Thank you, ma'am. And through your commissioner, I don't know if you can allow me to finish 31.55, and then I'll answer the whole question. Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So my recollection is that Mr. Siabonga Nene was not actively involved in facilitating this transaction. He did not play any meaningful role in the transaction, although he did travel to Mozambique on occasions. Mr. Siabonga was not then paid any fee from the PIC. Now, Interfrec brought this transaction. They introduced us to the promoters, when they approached us, there were two partners, or they claimed that there were two directors of the Interfrec, but one partner was active. Even when we traveled to Mozambique, Mr. Siabonga Nene, he was not much interested in this transaction. It appeared as if the other partner had a good knowledge of what was happening on the transaction. He knew the people there. You could discuss everything that we wanted to do. If we wanted a meeting with the banks, you would run around and do everything. Now, when we came to PMC, after PMC 1, when we informed them that we could not fund them as our partner, right? Then Mr. Siabonga Nene was no longer in the picture. It was Mr. Meza who was doing all the work, and now he was trying to negotiate to be part of the transaction as Mr. Meza, not as Interfrec at that point of time. And then when we asked him for the facilitation fee, he indicated from the discussion that we had initially with him, he indicated that he was doing all the work and Mr. Nene was no longer involved in facilitating the transaction. So that's how Mr. Siabonga Nene was not part of the facilitation fee, to my knowledge.
But Mr. Mirza, the Zaid International Trade and Investments was his company. Am I correct?
Correct,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Yes. At the same time, he was a partner with Mr. Nene in Interfrec.
Correct, Commissioner.
And Interfrec had come to the PIC for assistance.
Correct, Commissioner.
So in actual fact, you are paying $1.7 million to somebody who has come with his company and said, can you help us out? Am I putting it correctly? He's a director, isn't he, of India Frac?
Correct, Commissioner.
Mr. Mirza?
You're very correct, Commissioner.
He wants assistance, monetary assistance, to get into a project in Mozambique with the PIC, and he ends up getting paid 1.7 million.
Correct, Commissioner.
Although it's paid into a different company, but he is the person who requested assistance. So he's now being paid for bringing a transaction to the PIC. Is that the position? His own transaction.
Yeah. Let me follow up on this. Did Mr. Miza, have a shareholding? I mean, did he end up having a shareholding in this company? Because you might well find that he decided to be paid the amount just as a facilitator.
Okay, through you, Commissioner, I'll first answer your question, Commissioner. So, to my knowledge, just to put Interfrec, which was jointly owned by Mr. Nene and Mr. Miza, or maybe they were both directors of the company. That's what we could pick up from SABC documents. They owned Interfrec, and they approached the PIC with this transaction that can we partner together to invest into this? But as part of us partnering together, if PIC chooses to invest in, can you also fund us for a portion? That transaction did not happen. So which means Interfrec was out.
Before you proceed on that, that's exactly where I would like you to understand. Did you formally terminate the arrangement with Indiafrac? Did you say, look, this is not possible, this is what we're doing, thank you very much for the work done so far. Our relationship with Indiafrac is, there's been no fees paid, there's no commitment to you, it's not working out, thank you very much. And you closed that book with Indiafrac.
Okay, through your Commissioner, to my recollection, that was verbally communicated to Mr.
How can you do that verbally if you're dealing with somebody who's come with proper documentation? You've got a commitment, you've been out with them, you terminate properly. You are the PIC that is making the deal or not. There should have been some written communication, not even an email, to say thank you very much, but no thanks.
Okay.
Nothing.
Through Chair, I'll have to check whether one of my colleagues or the lead investment professional, Mr. Roy Rajda, did have any formal of email communication to Mr. Miza and Mr. Nene. But what my recollection is, in one of the meetings, it was when we were discussing the negotiation of this structure, it was communicated to them that we will not be able to fund them. And if they want to get involved into the transaction, they should fund their own funding to participate into the transaction.
I understand that. All I'm asking, I'm trying to understand the value system that PIC is engaged in here, where you have a company that comes to you with a proposal, and it doesn't work out, and your communication to them, and then one partner from that same initiative does a lot of running around, and you pay them in a different company $1.7 million. So unless you've terminated the one and there is a clear distinction between what your interaction is with the second, with the same person or half of the company in a different capacity. Because that's the question for me here, is the activity has blurred between one company and another, where one company is offering, coming with one proposal, one partner of that company does other work. I'm not questioning whether work was done or not, and gets paid into a different account, but the initial contact was through a particular company, a different company, and that has not been, from what you said, properly terminated. So it's almost like, okay, I mean, I can put a different perspective on that if I was listening to you. We come along together, the judge and I, we make a proposal to you, you say, okay, we're going to do it, we go and explore, you come out, whatever. Then we say, no, we can't fund you, but the judge has a different deal and he starts talking to you, and when he continues with you, you pay him money. And I'm sitting there saying, well, hang on, what's happened? How did that happen? Because you never terminated with me. That's what I'm trying to understand, is how it morphed from one to the other without a formality of the engagement.
Yeah.
And that's of concern if you did that.
Yeah.
That's of concern. So I would like to know that there was a formal termination to that with the one company, whether it's correct or otherwise about funding. That I'm not asking. I'm just saying they came with a proposal, it wasn't concluded, and there was a formal response and terminated that enabled the one partner with a different approach to interact with you and get paid. This way, it sort of seems to me a little bit like there's just something not quite comfortable for me there. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me try to understand this thing this way. So once Nene and Misa were no longer part of the transaction, that's a separate matter now. They are out of the way. Misa continues to do the work. All right? And then Misa then says he's entitled to some fee because he's doing the work, mainly because the PIC is going to invest in this company. Yeah? The one thing I just want to find out, did Zayed International actually put in a different proposal and say, we are doing the work now, we are entitled to the fees and all that? I think that's where the problem comes through, that was the formal process from Zayed saying, forget about the India FREC. We are Zayed now. We are running around, and we'll charge you a 1.7 million rand fee for the work which we're doing, and it will be billed through this Zayed International. Is that? I'm trying to find clarity too around there.
And if you could just relate it to the sentence in the middle that starts, he could be compensated for this and for facilitating PIC's investment in the palm oil project, which is exactly what was happening in the first place with the other company.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner, and through you, Commissioner. So after IndiaFric was not part of the transaction, Mr. Amir Miza, from my understanding, he requested that he wanted to be paid for the work that he has done to bring the transaction that we were not aware of as the PIC. And then the PIC was continuing to going to invest in a transaction that he has brought in, and he was out. And then, and secondly, he said over and above that, right, he had already also introduced us to 3 projects, which was the hotel, clinker plant, and cement plant. And then he said, over and above that, I will be able to assist you or to facilitate to the PIC that they will have the first right of refusal to co-invest with the local partner in these 3 projects. And then my recollection was I was not I didn't have a direct initial negotiation with him that was facilitated by Mr. Roy Rajda. He wanted a 2.5%, and then we came back to him that the FIP or the committee said they cannot pay him 2.5% that he requested. So the condition of him being paid the 1.7 million was, number one, he have facilitated a transaction, or you've originated the transaction that we are going to invest, which if he hasn't introduced that transaction, we are not going to invest there. Then the second one, over and above that, he had assisted the PIC also to have the first right of refusal to co-invest in the 3 projects that I've mentioned And that's how he has been paid the 1.7 million.
Did you follow any of the three investments, the hotel, the clinker plant, and the cement plant? Was that ever followed by the PIC?
Yes. So
And are you invested in them?
through you, Commissioner, the hotel and the clinker and cement plant projects, they were assessed by the team. And the time, from my recollection, the time they were assessing it, we were having some teething problems. You get to know about it as I go through my statement, because there were some problems that we started encountering with the local sponsor in this particular transaction. But the PIC did look into this project, and then there was also a commitment that was signed off by the sponsor that the PIC will have the first right of refusal on these projects and co-investment rights on these projects, which was signed off and facilitated by Mr. Miza. And from my recollection, Z International, it was his company. It was the same person that we were paying. It was Mr. Miza that we were paying through the company. So Mr. Nene was not part of that.
But did the PIC ultimately invest in the Mozambican project?
Correct. We ultimately invested into this S&S refinery project.
So the question of the fee would then be all right, it seems to me. But the question is, it's now paid into a company that was not involved.
Yeah, so because you see, it appears that the PIC couldn't pay the company where Mr. Nene, the young Mr. Nene was a shareholder. So it's why they couldn't, it appears that you couldn't pay that company, another company had to be paid, and it was then said Zaid can be paid, isn't it?
Through you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
The company that was
Not
paid
correct.
is
That's
the
not
person
correct.
that was doing the work,
Yeah.
which was Mr. Miza. And Mr. Miza was represented by the company called Z International.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I don't think we can get into a debate about it, but this is very unclear, and I would like to pursue it further and try and get some more information, because it's not that, if it was simply from the first company, India Frec, that said, okay, we want to partner and we're going to do the BE, that's one thing. They brought you the deal. The essence of it, they brought you the deal. Whether Mr. Miza says he was doing the work and Mr. Nene was not doing the work, that's their company problem. That's not the PIC's issue. That's the company that is dealing with you. And if you said, look, you've brought us the deal, we can't fund you, right? But you've brought us the deal, and we will pay you the commission for having brought us the deal because we're doing the investment. So that would have gone to that company, accepting that Mr. Mirza came with a different company and different work, and you followed that. And I'm just saying it's unclear to me, and I just would like to have clarification that you terminated your activity with India Frec before you started working with a separate company. Because the same thing could have been done. You could have said to them equally, look, we'll pay you, if you like, a facilitation fee, and that's it. There's something here that does not sit comfortably, and I'd like further information on it. Thanks. And it is about the way this interacted. It's not the PIC's determination as to whether a partner in a company, who's doing the work in the partner. That's the job of that company to sort out and sort themselves out, would be my view. I wouldn't want somebody else saying, oh, I'm paying you out of this company, but not you, because I think you've done more work. I don't think that's correct. But I'd like just to be clear about the interaction with India Frec, that it's terminated and you started working with Miza on his own, and that everybody knew that that was the circumstance.
And Mr. Masika, is it Masikela? Masikesa. We are not attacking you. We realize, of course, that in the paragraph you say I was not involved in the facilitation of a transaction fee and so forth. We're not, but we're trying to simply get the information and understand the position.
Correct, Commissioner. And for the clarity, I'm sure there are some colleagues who are also coming to clarify this.
Mr. Commissioner, I just wanted to perhaps assist. He had already said that he wasn't involved in the facilitation fee, right? We are going to have the person who was in charge of those negotiations, who was actually there, to come and explain who and what. I think the question that I'd asked was on what percentage this was based on. And he said on the total amount of the project. So my follow-up question was going to be why on the total amount of the project when PIC's stake was 53 million? Can you just clarify why PIC paid 1.5% of the total project when its stake was only 53 million?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Commissioner, through you. That's why I've, on paragraph 31.54, my recollection and what I'm aware of was over and above this S&S transaction, there were some additional work that he had done for the PIC to introduce the 3 projects that I've mentioned, the hotel, the clinker plant, and the cement plant, in which he was assisting the local partner to raise funding. And then PIC was given the first right of refusal to co-invest in those projects.
Can you just explain what that means in simple terms when you say first right of refusal? And can you also explain whether it meant that the referral fee would be paid after PIC had seen the project and they've refused or before?
So what it means, the first right of refusal is you are shown the project, you've shown the opportunity, and then you are given an opportunity to go and do what you could do, like to follow your process. And then during that process, the promoter or the project sponsor will not be obliged, or you will not be able to go and find other funders in that project. So until you say, I don't want to participate, then you can go and find another. So you have an advantage than in other participants who would want to come and co-invest in that project.
And according to that agreement, when was the referral fee supposed to be paid? At the completion of the project, before the project was approved, when exactly?
Through you, Chair, I think I'll provide that information to the evidence leaders. I don't have with it when this fee was actually paid and when the project was finalized. That I can provide that to you.
But in normal circumstances, when would that referral fee be due? When would it be paid?
In normal circumstances, once the deal is approved, and all the conditions to that fee has been met, and then a fee can be paid.
So I just want to understand, was there a contract? Because then that contract will lay out when the fee has got to be paid. Was there a contract, and in what name was that contract? Just as a first question. If you know, because you might not know, so we need to be fair to you, if you know. The 1.7 million, what was it based on? What amount was it based on? The $52 million or what? Then we'll be able to know the percentage.
I'll speak under correction for the first question. There was an agreement, but I'm not sure when it was signed, to have this amount be paid to Mr. Amir Meza. Yes. And then the second one, the 1.7 million, to my recollection, because it was also motivated to fund investment panel, it was 1.5% of the total project cost.
Which is how much? What is the
total project cost? Was 115 million United States dollars.
Yeah, but then how can you base? You can't base. You go to. Isn't it that that you only get paid for the money you are raising. You cannot be paid for the total project cost. You can't, if the PIC is going to invest a certain amount because you have raised it, you can only claim that part. You cannot claim the total project cost, isn't it? Isn't it how it's done?
Through you, Commissioner, that's correct, that's the norm. But from my understanding, this was an exceptional, because he was not only bringing this deal, he didn't only originate this deal, over and above. That's why I'm explaining that he brought other 3 possible transactions.
Yeah. Can I stop you? Then this agreement should have been structured differently, in the sense that we'll charge you for what the PIC has brought in, but we have introduced you to other work, and then you charge it as a separate amount. You cannot charge the project fee. This could have been structured differently, isn't it?
Through Commissioner, correct.
Perhaps it would help if we get the submission that went to the FIP that authorized this payment, and that would just help us clarify exactly what was submitted and what was approved and on what basis.
Yeah, and the money part might not be the issue, but how they structured the money could be the issue.
Can I request just a few minutes for him to actually point the commission to the relevant part?
We can get it later. It doesn't have to be now. I think there's a lot of evidence. Let him continue, and he can just do that, and you can just indicate where it is in due course.
Okay.
May I just say, when you don't know, you don't have an answer to a question, it is fine to say you don't know, and just point to the relevant person who's going to be able to answer that question, because you are just dealing with the part that you know, that you played.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Shall I proceed? On paragraph 32, I took my active involvement in the transaction ended upon the approval of the transaction by FIP. Then the subsequent negotiations and implementation of the approved terms by the PIC FIP was done, in most cases handled by PIC legal team, the investment team within the developmental investment unit. Then on paragraph 33, I'm now discussing what happened after the transaction was approved. So after the legal agreements were signed between parties, I'm aware that the disbursements were made in tranches on 26th of November 2014, USD 18 million, and 28th of May 2015, USD 5 million, and 17 July 2015, USD of 30 million. And further, USD 10 million on the 17th of May 2016 to acquire a further 25% equity into the S&S refinery. And all these payments were made pursuant to approval of the project by the PSSME FIP.
Can I just stop you there? On 17 May 2016, when PIC went further to acquire 25% equity, was the refinery operational at the time?
The refinery was, we have just finished the commission, and the operation started in April 2016. And I was not, in reference to the 10 million of, to acquire further 25% into equity, I was not involved in that transaction, but I was also made aware as a non-executive director of the company that the follow-on investment was necessitated to facilitate that an appropriate operator to be part of the shareholding at some point in the future, hence additional 25% would be allocated to the operator to ensure alignment of the interest. I'm also aware, soon after the disbursement, the PIC Portfolio Management and Valuation, PMV team also took over the responsibility of post-investment monitoring and active management of the investment. I was then appointed by the PIC Directors Affairs Committee to be a non-executive director of the S&S refinery, post the transaction approval in and around March 2015. The board is comprised of two representatives from the PIC and 2 representatives from the promoters. Then Mr. Mohammad Rasu and Ms. Saidata Rasu, his wife, represented the promoters, while Mr. Rajda and myself represented PIC on the board. Then I'll go on to discuss, Commissioner, on the post-investment and my period as the PIC representative on the S&S board. So my role later was limited to that of a non-executive director of S&S refinery, and I was not involved in any operations or administration of the business. Soon after our appointment as the PIC representative on the board, our first task was to ensure that all the plant engineering construction work is well completed, which at the time was done by a company called Aoki, and also ensure the equipment which was assembled by Desmet Balastra, a Belgian company, was well complete, assembled and tested. In fact, we wanted to ensure that the plant construction work was completed on time as invested when the PIC invested. The technical experts who were assisting us, Mott McDonald's, continued to assist us in tracking construction and commissioning of the plant progress. And in and around 2015, the S&S board now, it was Mr. Roy Rajda, myself, and the representative of the local partner, we took a decision to visit crude palm oil suppliers and traders in Malaysia, operational and maintenance company in India, as well as the construction company Aoki in India. We also negotiated with various crude palm oil suppliers in Malaysia who undertook to provide us with sufficient supply at well-negotiated terms and agreements. We also met operation and maintenance company that we targeted to appoint to operate the plant. The name of the company was called Aryan Engineering, and Aryan Engineering is head office in India, and it has demonstrated the experience in design, construction, and operations of large process plants, boasting the involvement in oil and fats sectors since 1999. They have operated in 9 countries in over 37 projects. So we were satisfied that Aryan Engineering will be able to operate the plant. We also met Aoki in India, the company that was responsible for design and construction of the plant.
Question? I don't understand. I mean, you guys are on the board of the company, but it seems you are managing the company. I mean, did the company have a CEO and management?
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner, and through you. So when we came in, I think I will discuss it later as well.
I think if
it was, okay. Should I continue?
Yeah, continue.
Yes. All right,
continue.
Thank you. So, and then later, the first dry commissioning of the plant started around October 2015, and wet commissioning around December 2015.
Sorry, can you just explain what dry commissioning is and what wet commissioning is?
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. So, dry commissioning is, I'm not an engineer, but I'll try to explain. So they'll go process by process. They have to switch on that if it is boiler makers, they'll switch on without putting in the real oil and see whether they're functioning, and then they'll tick. They'll go to another equipment, they'll test it without the real oil being used. And then the water commissioning is now where you only procure enough oil just for you to test if the whole process is working. So when I say first dry commission started around October 2015, that's what they did with the engineers and equipment suppliers, right? And then wet commission was later in 2015.
Since we are there, can you explain this whole process about palm oil conversion to soap and the other things? I think since we were there, you know, we know the other part where crude oil is processed to refine petrol and all that maybe we know a bit, but just explain the other process.
Sorry,
Ken, you know.
I'm sorry, before he does that, can I, Mr. Commissioner, can I have a 2-minute adjournment, please?
Or 5 minutes or 10 minutes even.
We'll adjourn for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for the adjournment. I thought so when I found it congested when I got to the bathrooms. Thank you, Commissioner. You can continue.
I think just continue and then we'll ask at the end and all that, or somewhere in between, but just continue. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, before I continue, there was a question that was asked on what was presented to the final approving committee in terms of this fee. So I would want to give you a reference to Annexure C1, Fund Investment Panel Report, and take you to page 3 on paragraph 2. That was the request that was made to yes, FIP report.
Called appraisal report.
Yes.
Page 3, yeah?
Page 3, paragraph 2.
Paragraph 2. Okay.
So that's where the request for the approval of the
Just
fee.
read it. Just read it.
So
Lucy.
the heading says the purpose of submission. So I will not read the first paragraph. I will read the second paragraph. It says, in addition, PMC is recommend to the PSSME FIP the payment of referral fee of USD 1,726,500 to Mr. Amir Miza, who introduced the potential investment in the company. This equates to 1.5% of the project cost of USD 115.1 million, which is in line with the guidelines approved by PIC Investment Committee. PIC's delegation of authority requires that fees in excess of 50 million is approved by the relevant fund investment panel. The fee shall be payable provided that Mr. Miza is able to secure co-investment rights for PIC in Nakala Cementos, a cement plant, which is the main sponsor Mr. Rasu intends developing and implementing.
Yeah, so can you see that the project cost is still an issue, but I mean, maybe somebody can explain it better some way, isn't it?
Through your commissioner, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And perhaps just to add that then, if I understand this correctly, it is the same person, Mr. Rasul, who is part of the palm oil and the cement.
Yes, Commissioner.
So it's one counterparty.
Yes.
Two different companies, but two different investments, but one counterparty.
Yes.
Yes, Commissioner.
And the total now has changed from your 63 odd million to 115 million.
The 115.1 million was the project cost.
Yes, but why would you pay
So-
it on the project cost as a fee?
That's the explanation that my colleague will come and explain.
Okay, thank you.
So, Commissioner, on paragraph 42, so following the commissioning of the plant, the first batch of palm oil production commenced on the 1st of April 2016 with 2,874 tons of crude palm oil, producing 2.2 million liters of edible oil and 30,960 kgs of laundry soap. And then the second shipment was again approximately 300 metric tons in October 2016. Maybe if I should add on, Commissioner, that currently now I was also told that there's another consignment that you've just landed in, at the port. I will explain that later.
Just a quick one. Before we left, I asked for that process of converting palm oil to this end products. If you know, you can explain that to us. I asked the question earlier, not in this session.
But are you able to answer that question? Are you able to give an indication as to how it's done?
Through you, Commissioner, I'm not a process engineer or a chemical engineer, but as a board member, I can try to explain the process. I understand you are trying to equate with the process of crude Brent oil that is refined to produce refined petrol or diesel. It's almost similar process. They harvest what they call crude palm oil from the palm trees. So it's purely dead oil, right? And then that dead oil is processed through various process. They go, what they call, first thing is to separate impurities from the real oil, and then it goes to a process of cleaning it. Then after they've cleaned it, then there's a byproduct called stearin that is used for soap making and so forth. And then what is left now, which is almost clean oil, then it goes through a process of deodorizing it, supposed to have a certain smell, and then you go to a process of cleaning it until it becomes edible palm oil that you can use for your frying and cooking. So the process is almost similar. So it's a big plant that process that the crude palm oil goes through that process.
So the last end product, the biggest end product is actually palm oil to cook.
Yes.
To cook with it. It's like, okay, all right, okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. If I may proceed. And then when I joined the, I'm on paragraph 43, when I joined the S&S board in 2015, I was aware that governance may present challenges. We initially took comfort from oversight from Mozambican banks who were already invested in the project, and BDO, which is an audit firm in Mozambique, who were the advisors of the project sponsors, Mr. Rasu. So I completely understood that I was a non-executive director of a company in a unique business operating environment, very different from the South African operating environment. The business culture is different, and the level of governance is still very elementary when compared to the South African economy. It was a mammoth task, if I should say that, Commissioner, for me as a board member to adjust and at the same time ensuring that strong corporate governance principles are observed nonetheless. There was a lot of work that needed to be done by management to strengthen the governance of the company. At the time, the company was a one-man family business. Mr. Rasu controlled the operations of the company and ran the company as a family business even after the new funders came in. So at the first board meeting, it was agreed that the governance of the company needed to be implemented, including appointment of the permanent CEO responsible for the operations and administration of the company. It was also agreed that the company secretary of the company should be appointed. So at that point of time, our then co-equity partner, the local partner, Mr. Rasu, was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the company. And the S&S board agreed that it would be a short-term arrangement whilst we were in the process of finding a suitable candidate to head the operations and administration of the company. Then over time, I realized that the promoter or our local partner had a very little understanding of the importance of corporate governance. He lacked understanding of corporatization of the business as the new investors and funders came on board. He continued to run the business as a family business, given that he was still the majority shareholder at that time. The board later appointed a permanent CEO responsible for operations and administration. He did not stay for a long period due to his health problems and family issues. He also pointed that he was not happy with the working conditions and pressure he was getting from the shareholder, in particular the local partner. So after the departure of the first CEO, the board again appointed another general manager for operations in early 2017, and that GM did not stay long again. And my understanding it was that he was frustrated by the working conditions and he was not given enough authority by Mr. Rasu to run the operations. So the administration of the operations of the company were disrupted. That posed a challenge to us as the board members, and we could not get adequate operations updated, and we could not get adequate operations update and management accounts. The PIC, PMV team also faced similar challenges. They could not get access to the information or updates. We traveled to Nakala and at times to Maputo and held several meetings with our co-partner, which was led by Mr. Rasu and his advisors, BDO Maputo, in an effort to resolve these issues. There was very little progress and willingness by the co-partner on this issue. So it was difficult for us, and I'm referring to Mr. Roy Raja and myself, as non-executive directors, as we were not responsible for the day-to-day operations and administration of the company. And then the difficulty was further worsened by the fact that the project is very far, and it's not easy to travel to the plant from South Africa. It is approximately 5 to 6 hour traveling time, and the round-trip journey cannot be completed in a day.
Before you proceed, just one question lingers a lot here. When you put in the money in this company, did you have a good shareholder agreement to regulate all these issues about, you know, an entrepreneur wanting to run the company the way they run it?
Sorry, Commissioner, if I may. Excuse me. Mr. Masakiasa has been asked to complete the statement. The shareholder agreements and all the CPs are going to be addressed at the end, because I didn't want to keep on cutting him and asking him to go back to them.
I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. If I may proceed to paragraph 52, where I'm discussing the impediments in project implementation. So I will start with external market conditions, challenges. So what really happened then after we have invested, and what were the problems? So at the time the PIC considered the investment, the Mozambican economy was flourishing. In fact, the country was regarded as one of the fastest growing African economy. The Mozambican GDP was around 8%. Interest rates were stable. Inflation was very stable. The domestic currency was stable. And there was strong influx of foreign direct investments into the country. And furthermore, the northern province of Mozambique were growing too. It was also that period when there was discovery of natural gas in that region. So the reason why I'm putting this commission is it's just to support the reason why Mozambique at that point. And I would want to show you how the economy was doing at that point by showing a research that was done by an independent research company in the United States of America about Mozambique, and what subsequently happened on Annex D on page 7. I just want to show you what happened when we invested and subsequently what happened. On the Annex D, the research reports, the NKC African Economics Report. And I would like to take you through to page 7 of that report, where they are talking about the quarterly update. This is a recent report. This is a December 28th report. So on page 7 of that report, right, you see the economy was growing on average 7.1, 7.4. So when we invested, the actual growth in that economy around 2014, you can see it was around 7.4% growth, right? And then we disbursed around 2015, it was growing around 6.6%. And if you read some of the research from IMF, World Bank at that time, they were saying Mozambique was just growing. It was on average going to grow around 6 to 7% over the next 10%, over the next 10 years, over a long period of time. And we use that basis as part of the our projection to invest in that country. But if you see the sudden fall in 2016 when we were supposed to start production, remember between 2014 when we ended, this thing was between 80 and 90% complete. So we finished the construction and the commission. In 2016 we were about to start production. See how the economy has dropped from 6.6% to around 3.8%, which is I think close to about 100% fall from the projections. And if I take you further to the second page, page on the page 12 of that report. Okay? Page 12 of the NKC report. That talks about the inflation as well as the short-term interest rates. Right? Remember, this business had borrowed money from local banks in which the interest rates were locally, they were linked to the local interest rates for the 40 million secured debt. If you see, between 2014, it was flat around 10% and shot up to close to 30%. That was 3 times interest rates, and it was accruing on the balance sheet of this company. And then we could also produce crude palm oil at that point. So these sudden changes in the Mozambican economy were never expected, and did affect the projections.
So this is the graph at the bottom, isn't it? Where you are saying short-term interest rates. No?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can see. If you can.
So they went from the 15% to 30%. Is that
correct?
What you're saying? Okay.
Correct.
Let me see. Yeah.
So, Commissioner, the reason why I'm showing you that is the time we invested, things were very good. Mozambique was the right country to be in. That's where the returns could come from the rest of the continent. And I've attached the McKinsey report, The Lions on the Move. That's a well-known report on Africa and the Africa story. And if you see in the McKinsey report in Annex E, again, Mozambique is actually picked up at that point in 2010 as one of the best countries to invest in. And I could from my experience when I was traveling to Mozambique, I know they used to have a very small flight, I think of 30 to 40 passengers from Ora Tambo to Nampula. And the next, in 2015, they have to deploy a bigger plane because there was a lot of engineers that were going up in the north. But around 2016, 2017, the cranes now, they have rusted there, they have stopped. It tells you what actually happened. It was a sudden shock in the economy. And that affected the project as well. And then on number 53, Commissioner, I'll talk about after the disbursement, both Mozambican economy and operating environment drastically changed. The Mozambican economy and market conditions deteriorated worse than expected since inception of the PIC investments. The local currency interest rate, for instance, was, I've discussed this, was around 15%, and subsequently the interest rate more than doubled to over 30%. Which adversely affected the SNS refinery financial viability and projections of the project. And what it also means our initial projections and assumptions when we did the transactions were meaningless. And on paragraph 54, I've already emphasized that the local currencies too depreciated significantly since we concluded the transaction. The exchange rate was approximately 30 meticals, and it went to close to about 70 meticals. That it almost depreciated by 100, more than doubled. So the reason why I'm saying the local currency is very important because the business model is that you procure your raw materials. The crude palm oil is not produced in Mozambique. You use the hard currency to buy that crude palm oil from either Malaysia or Indonesia. And now, if your projection was around 30 to 40, and then suddenly it went to 70, It means you'll be out of business on day one. So this actually contributed to some problems or some teething problems with this project. The paragraph 55, I spoke about the S&S refinery business model is highly sensitive to exchange rate risk as it procures raw materials in foreign currency, the United States dollars, while the revenues, sales is in local currency, METCALs. Translating foreign currency risk exposure into product pricing will result in S&S refinery not being competitive within the local markets. And then the currency hedging was initially considered, however, it was too expensive by that time without first testing the market and reaching the full production. And another problem was the lack of credit in Mozambique. So when the economy was facing problem, the Mozambican banks were also hit very hard by the sudden changes in the economy and the operating environment in Mozambique. Some banks even collapsed. For this reason, local banks in particular were not willing to assist S&S refinery with the letter of credit for its working capital requirements. The S&S refinery is highly reliant on the procurement of packaging and raw materials, which requires the letter of credit support from local banks. This has also contributed to delays in full production of the plant. And then the projection at the time of concluding the transaction indicated that the plant was capable of producing sufficient volumes and to allow the organization to trade itself back to its financial sustainability. And in order to do this, the plant will need to operate at a full-time scale basis at 80% and of its design capacity of 350 tons per day, which translates to around 280 tons per day. And production at these levels would have resulted in the refinery producing in the region of 96,320 tons of refined palm oil annually. Then the company does not have significant cash reserves with which to finance the working capital by then required to fund production as discussed above. And then the working capital requirement to procure the raw materials necessary for the production volumes discussed above equates to around 25 million. So the local banks were supposed to give us a letter of credit of 25 million US dollars for the company to operate in a full cycle. But so the company could not require, they couldn't get the letter of credit from the local banks, including the banks that already invested into this project. So what that meant was the company was stuck in between problems. So the first one, there was high cost of raw materials as a result of depreciation of the local currency. There was no working capital, and local banks were failing to provide letter of credit capacity to the company. And then there was a mounting interest cost on the balance sheet as a result of interest that have skyrocketed after the investment by the PIC. And this was a serious challenge to the board and the management of the company. So the above challenges that I have discussed, Commissioner, were considered during due diligence and at the time of concluding the transaction. However, our assumption did not factor in the effects of such steep interest rate hikes, sudden changes in the economic growth factors, and significant currency devaluation. Then there were some also internal challenges that we faced after we have invested as well. On paragraph 61, I think I spoke about it, that about the interest rates and accumulating interest costs that was on the balance sheet. But I also discussed on paragraph 62, where I said there were also delays in the construction and commissioning of the plant, which was a result of various factors such as the management issues that I've alluded to. There was some flooding in Nakala, which happened around December 2015, resulting in power outages. And furthermore, I spoke about the local banks were not in support of issuing letter of credit to assist S&S refinery with its production working capital. And also the process of obtaining the letter of credit was a very protracted process, which also resulted in significant delays in procuring the crude palm oil. And another problem, the internal problem, is there was also a lack of strong management and constant interference by the local partner. I think I've explained this earlier in the operations of the business. And also management kept on, the local management was also frustrated by the working conditions and delays in the procurement of the crude palm oil. And lastly, some of the problems that we faced was, I can summarize that it was issue of governance, the problem of a one-man business. The business culture there is different from what we're used to. And there was issue of language barriers. Those all posed challenges in the project. Now, having faced with these projects, there were some key interventions that we did to this company. Having faced with the above challenges, the PIC, including myself as the PIC representative on the S&S board, came up with various interventions. And I'll discuss some of the interventions that we did. So the first one, we have appointed now a newly qualified and strong operator to run the operations and the administration of the company. And that company is called Vamara, and Vamara is a subsidiary of Export and Trade Group, which is known as ETG. And ETG is one of the largest and fastest growing integrated agricultural supply chain managers and processors in sub-Saharan Africa, importing and exporting soft commodities from 22 African countries with operations across 40 countries. They also have oil refinery plants across the continent. Vamara, through its distribution channels, is the market for the products as well. And we have already started engaging with the local banks, the senior note leaders, to relook at the company's balance sheet restructuring, as well as the local interest rates. If you can, restructuring is the local interest is increased significantly. And we have also removed the local partner, Mr. Rasu, from the operations of the company, and is no longer involved in any way in the operations of the business. And then I'll go to my last conclusion, Commissioner. There were some assertions and by some media news that the PIC invested in a dilapidated plant in Mozambique. And those assertions, I would like to, according to my knowledge, I've seen this plant. They are not true, and they are very unfounded. The S&S refinery plant, to my knowledge, is a state-of-the-art, well-designed, well-built by qualified engineers, and is built by best equipment. And currently, the plant is in operations and is managed by Vamara, an ETG subsidiary, as an operator. And I've also attested to that by giving an Annexure F. This is an independent valuation that was recently done last year by KPMG on the valuation of the current valuation of the plant. So if you look closely on that report, Commissioner, it shows that the PIC has not significantly lost its value. The equity value has declined as compared to the last year's valuation, but the asset is still intact, and you're still in the money if you are going to do the net asset valuation on the plant. So that's the reason why I have attached the KPMG independent valuation of S&S refinery that was recently done. And as we speak, I was also informed that there was another crude palm oil reconsignment that you've just landed on the 12th of March 2019 to commence full production cycle. So I also believe, Commissioner, that like any investment, risks and challenges are very inherent, but anything can go wrong. In this case, some unforeseen challenges and we have manifested, and the projections were missed. And some of them we didn't have control over it. And personally, Commissioner, I'm still convinced that with the right operator in place now, the PIC will recoup its investment in the long-term period. And then my other recommendation is, from my experience now, I picked up investing outside South Africa in the rest of Africa is tough. It's not for weak people. It's very tough. And I therefore recommend that the PIC should probably set up a standalone division that looks into the investment which are outside South Africa. So should we have a unity for Africa investments and global investment that is separate with the right skill, with the right people with experience in the rest of the continent. And my other recommendation is partnering with locals is very important when investing outside South Africa. However, a careful analysis of the local partners is crucial. Local partners should be established corporates, not individuals or family-run business. We have bent our fingers already, but we have learned that going forward we should partner with established business rather than family-run businesses. And then my last point, Commissioner, is advancing corporate governance. The rest of Africa is a challenge again, but PIC should develop a different ESG matrix for the rest of Africa, since most corporates are only beginning to embrace this new business culture, and it's a gradual process. And Commissioner, I would like to end there, and that's my statement. Thank you.
I assume the original has been signed.
It has, sorry. It has, Commissioner.
I would just ask in relation to your testimony so far, you've mentioned the board a number of times. Have there been any changes to the board composition? And when and who are on the board, given your approach and concerns about governance?
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner, and through you. The board has not changed. I'm still sitting on the board of the S&S refinery, and I also understand Mr. Roy Raja is still sitting on the as a PIC representative on the board. We have just embarked on the process now of bringing in the new operator, where we are going to re-look at how we are going to change the governance, because we need to include in the operator as part of the board as well. And we're also in the process of removing the other local partner from the board.
But who is on the board now? Is it just the two you had mentioned before and the two PIC representatives? Is that the full composition of the board? Who are the other members of the board apart from the two of you?
The other members of the board is Mr. Mohammed Rasul and his wife, Mr. Sadat Rasul.
So that's the board as it was, then it hasn't changed. You are looking at changing the board?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Can I ask a couple of others? When you were in discussions with India Frick, had you ever heard of the Zayed International Trade and Investments, or was that something that occurred subsequently?
Through you, Commissioner, I haven't, when we were in discussion with India Frick, I didn't know a company called Zayed.
Not heard of it?
I was not aware of it.
And then just looking at the business case, when you went out to look at it, you looked at the plant and the equipment and the state of the art of that. But were you accompanied by the risk component of the PIC? Because then obviously the business case is purchases in dollars, so you've got a currency risk, growth risk, all of those kinds of things. In that initial consideration of the business plan and looking at your input costs, how much, well, what role did risk play in that evaluation? And you have acknowledged that some of your assumptions were not appropriate or not accurate enough. You know, so just, was there sufficient input from risk in all its elements into the decision making?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, and through you. I would like to take you to Annex C1, the FIP report, right? And I'll take you to page 'Okay. No, FIP, even PMC2 is there, everything is there. So I would like to check this issue. Okay, if you go to page 59 of the report, where there is some, with the last paragraph saying operating cost. So I want you to flip that page, right? 1, and then you flip 2. Then you will see a report, a risk report, which is written risk and mitigating measures in a table format. Yes. So that was the risk report. So these are the issues that they picked up as the risk, and some risk mitigants. So indeed, the risk did assess this project in conjunction with the investment team.
While he's at it, can you go to page 65 of that particular document?
65.
Oh, sorry, it's PMC 2.
Where are you in the document?
It's PMC 2, page 65.
What's PMC 2?
That's annexure.
Annexure B.
Annexure B. 65. It's this table here. Annexure B. 65.
Yes. Can you just read the part that goes exchange or currency risks? Can you read that out into the record?
Okay. It says, so the key risk that was identified by risk was the exchange or currency risk. And then the risk description was the price of the product is dependent on the Mexico to US dollar exchange rate. Currency fluctuation may impact the price negatively, right? And then the risk mitigant, the company, so which means S&S, right, to develop a hedging strategy. I think I've answered this in my statement, was to put a hedge without a full production, right? And we haven't tested the market. Remember, it's a new project. It was going to be expensive for the company, which was not generating any income at that point of time, and hence we did not implement this hedging strategy. And what normally happens with these crude palm oil traders, they don't normally give you a long-term hedge on the currency risk. They normally give you maybe a 3 months forward. Anything above that, they won't give you. They normally trade as and when we have confirmed an order. But so to buy a hedge on the total production was going to be expensive for the company that was not generating any income.
I think the question really isn't whether the risk, although my question was the role of risk, and clearly they've set things out, to what degree was that taken heed of in the decision to invest? That's more the question, is that risk is pointing out real risks that have in fact materialized. And therefore, with hindsight, which is always perfect, but with hindsight, was sufficient account taken of what the risks were that were identified by your risk team in terms of both investing in the first place and secondly, the mitigants that should be in place, including governance and everything else. Just your assessment of the risks as identified by your own team and whether sufficient account. Retrospectively, what would your decision have been if you had to look again and say, we took it now, taking all of this information and what has materialized into account?
Thank you, Commissioner. I will not answer for the committee, but and I was in the committee when this thing was discussed. Key macroeconomic indicators were also discussed, was things like how the economy was going to grow, what is going to happen with the foreign currencies in that country, what are the fundamentals that are likely going to impact this business model. that was considered by the committees. And if I can even take you to page 23 of the same document, you see what our chief economist was saying at that point of time, which were the inputs that we used, right, to make a business case or a best case assumption in our models. On page 23, where he's talking about country and sector overview. So the information that we had at that time, if you just look at that table, the economists, we took some information from Business Monitor International, IMF, World Bank, and some research he has done. He was telling us, number one, the economy is going to grow up to 10% in 2019. The economy is below 3%. He's telling us that the CPI was going to maintain around 6%. I think it's more than doubled. And then he was telling us the exchange rate is going to average around 30, 35. It's close to more than doubled. Even if we look at the models that have been used, we even put a leeway, maybe exchange rate will go as far as 40 or 45. Still, they've more than doubled to 70. So the information we had, the research that was done at that point, it was saying that this thing is going to fly once we have invested into it. And then things drastically changed after we have invested.
Were there any CPs that were put in place before PIC embarked on this deal?
Okay. Through you, Commissioner, yes, there were some CPs, and the CPs, they are in Annexure C2. I can read them to you.
Can you please read them into the record?
Okay. It's Annexure C2, FIP resolution. So you have to skip the first minutes, right, after page 5. And then there is a resolution of the Priority Sector and Small Medium Enterprise Fund Investment Panel meeting that passed at a meeting held on the 11th of August 2014.
I think what we're looking for are the CPs, which is 1017.
1017 are the CPs that we're looking for.
Sorry. Sorry, Commissioner. I wanted to take you to the one on the resolutions that were taken on the decisions that were made on that FIP meeting. What was the CP that was approved by the FIP at that point? And it's on your annexure C2, right? FIP resolutions, and then the first one were minutes, and then until to page 5. If you flip that page 5, you see the resolution of the Priority Sector and Small Medium Enterprise Fund.
I'm asking you to go back, go to page 4 of the same document.
Yes.
Because that's the conditions precedent before you come to the resolution.
Yes, those are the condition precedent that we captured.
I think that was the question being asked.
Okay, they are almost the same. I can read them. So on 10.17, it talks about the condition precedent. And the condition precedent were as follows: signed off by PIC legal of transaction agreement, which were the shareholders agreement, project agreements, transaction agreements, engineering and construction agreement, procurement agreement, crude palm oil and raw material supply agreement, referral fee to Mr. Amiza of 1.5% of the project value, paid on condition on him securing PIC co-investment rights in the cement plant, proposed Nakala plant, and any other business that were of interest to PIC. Then S&S oil refinery must complete the 10 hours prior to disbursement, and all assets relating to refinery operations should be transferred to S&S Oil Refinery.
You can continue.
Okay, further conditions were as follows. In light of the fact that Mr. Rasu obtained a bank funding loans from his other companies to invest in S&S and used assets as security, PIC should take pledge of the sponsor shares in S&S Oil Refinery. A lock-in period for a minimum of 10 years for Mr. Rasu in the event that he resigns. Him or his family members should not engage in any business activities of similar nature as S&S Oil Refinery. It was like a restraint of trade. Then S&S Oil Refinery should ensure that the bank funding was negotiated on terms substantially the same as PIC funding, that's the CTA. Then the PIC and the bank would enter into security sharing agreement or security SPV. Then the plant has right to appoint, the PIC has the right to appoint or remove the CEO, CFO, or any senior management staff. The PIC should have the right to appoint a person or a firm to verify that all assets are properly transferred prior to disbursement. The PIC should appoint the majority of directors to the board of the directors. That the day one audited financial statements be submitted, the Ernst & Young valuation for the amount of 115.1 million.
Yeah, we didn't submit
The secondment of CEO and CFO would be a precondition to transaction. High costs to promoter, 17 million. Why should the PIC be responsible to pay that? I don't know if it was. Then the risk report condition should form part of the transaction. Then 10.91, the PSME fee further approved authority to the chief investment officer or a senior fund principal, small medium enterprises, or their designates to sign all documents required for PIC to participate in the transaction.
And that basically reflects the resolution that was taken as well.
Yes.
Correct?
It should be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you aware of how many of the CPs were fulfilled before entering into this transaction?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Like I said, the process of investment implementation after my active involvement was mainly led by our legal team to make sure that all the condition precedents were met. What I can talk to what I've seen at the board of S&S Refinery. Okay. But like things like warehouses, they are there, I've seen them. Things like the appointment of CEO, yes, we did appoint a CEO when we came to board, but unfortunately that CEO was frustrated, he left. We appointed another CEO, he didn't leave, and now we have an operator, and then we don't need a permanent CEO, but the operator does all the operation and administration of the plant. And another one was the condition that I'm aware that the agreements, I'm aware of them that they were done. The engineering and construction agreement, when we entered there, they were already signed because the contractors were already there. The crude palm oil raw material supply agreement, that's why I even indicated that we even went to Malaysia. The crude palm oil, they're like traders. They don't sign an agreement that are gonna give you crude palm oil at this price. Well, the price are determined on the date in which you purchase. That's the traders don't sign forward agreements, supply agreements with suppliers. But what they could do, they could just say that any time that you need, we'll give you a preferential treatment. Make sure that your crude palm oil is available.
Perhaps I could just ask while you're checking that for a couple of other things, if you could explain. Because if one looks at the document that was submitted, there's a reference in the just above 10.9.1 that the first bullet point is the PIC should appoint the majority of directors to the board of the company, and that doesn't seem to be in the resolution. And then third bullet point, the Ernst & Young valuation to the amount of US dollars 115.1 million. If you look at the resolution, that has suddenly become 129 million. How does that become 129 from 115 and from 63? I think we'll need to understand these numbers better, and perhaps we can get a proper presentation, whether it's from yourself or Mr. Roger when he comes. But these numbers change every time you look at the document. So that would be the two questions I would have there. And then just as a board member, is the refinery servicing the PIC loan?
Okay. Through you, Commissioner. So the first question, I think the team, including Mr. Rajda, will give you this discrepancy between the one that is in the minutes and the one that was final signed on the resolution. And then the second one is the terms of the debt was, it was a 10-year loan with a 2-year moratorium, which is expired. And because of the challenges that I have discussed, Commissioner, we never, after we have dispersed the funds, we never, and then we have finished the construction, we have done the commissioning, so, and then things changed. We never had a point where we got to full production of this plant, because of all these problems that I was explaining, and for that reason, the interest was not serviced by the company. But now, with the coming in with the operator who has the working capital to assist us, we are hoping that the financials of the company will start kicking, and we'll be able to, the company should be able to service its interest.
Just for clarity, as at this point, the debt has not been serviced?
It's not
Okay.
serviced at the moment.
And then the difference between the 115 and the 129, you're saying Mr. Raja will deal with?
Yes, and I think the team will also
Okay.
give the evidence to the evidence leader.
Okay, I got one or two questions. Let me start with this. Okay, now, two questions here. So, you mentioned that, I think on your point 69 and point 70, on your statement, you said that sort of investing on the continent is not a child's play or something like that, you know. You know, this talks to best practices on the continent, you know. Many people have paid school fees already on the continent, whether it's French companies in Francophone, you know, Portuguese companies in Mozambique and Angola and all that. It's a bit worrying that the PIC just went in there, you know, alone, without, you know, partnering with people and all that. So it's, I mean, it's something on a broader scale that the best practices were not looked at, you know, given this risky, these countries are not as mature as Sweden and Switzerland and all that. Before the PIC sort of adopted this Africa strategy, well, was there quite a lot of thinking around that, you know, in terms of best practices and the many risks, whether it's currency risk and political risk, and even here you had key man risk, succession planning risk, those kind of issues.
Thank you, Commissioner. And through you, I was privileged to be part of the team that designed this Africa investment strategy. And when we were designing this Africa investment strategy in the CIS office, the first thing that we said is we cannot go solo. And we really knew that going to the rest of the continent was going to be very tough. By that time, we were hearing stories of big corporates that have lost money in the rest of the continent, and we also heard of companies, South African companies, that were moving up the north, and they were making it. So what we realized when we were doing the research was the best thing is we have to develop a strategy that is that we should always partner with locals, number one, or if you're not partnering with locals, we should always partner with a financial institution, right, in the country in which we will be operating, because normally they will know where the dead bodies are buried, because they will be operating in those countries. And hence we said our strategic investment partners program was very important. And also, as part of our strategy, we actually developed what we call the SA Inc. strategy, where PIC, as a funder, we collaborate with institutions or companies in South Africa that were going up in the rest of the continent. Let's say, for argument's sake, Shoprite is moving up the north, then PIC will become a co-funder in the rest of the continent, and Shoprite will run the operations, and then they will deal with all those things. So we did consider that as part of our investment strategy. And I was also part of the team. We traveled across the rest of the continent. I remember myself and my boss, we even went to Africa, in Accra in 2012, where we actually announced that PIC is now a big player in the rest of the continent, and we would want to partner with the local funders and other private equity funders who were doing business in the rest of the continent. We even traveled to the likes of AFDB. By that time, they were still in Tunis. We presented our story and our credentials, and we asked them to partner with them. We signed MOUs with them that we would want to work on a co-investment partnership with them. We initiated discussions with IMF, World Bank, because we know they're already in the rest of the continent, and they have some inroads in the rest of the continent. They'll give you sort of, inverted commas, political risk insurance, because of their how big the institutions are. We have some MOUs with them. We went and see some regional DFIs, like of PTA Bank in East Central Africa. We have some MOUs with them. We also signed a MOU with ECOWAS Bank, which is a regional bank in the Western Africa. So these were all strategies that we were trying to put in place, that when we go into the rest of the continent, we are not just going there nakedly. We have to work with the local partners, local financiers, and perhaps with regional DFIs or international DFIs with the likes of World Bank and so forth. So we did consider that. And the good thing was Mozambique was 45 minutes flight to Maputo, close home, SADC, good story. But I guess the challenge there that I've alluded to you was probably we didn't pick the right partner to work with in that country. So the strategy did speak to those issues. We picked those challenges. We came out with some mitigants, and on this case, we partnered with the wrong partner.
And of course, you can have a strategy, but it needs to be tested on the ground, and as you saw that you could have a plan, but once it's on the ground, you could have problems.
Yes.
Yeah?
No. Through you, Commissioner, correct. We also have some good stories as well in the rest of the continent, where we've partnered with the right partners, and we are doing well.
Yeah, okay. Question? In terms of production, the current production or the last year or two of the plant, where are we now? How different it is to the sort of projections and all that? I think you do have some figures somewhere. Yes. If you could just highlight where we are in terms of production and all that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I'll provide the hard numbers, the current hard numbers, to the evidence leaders, because I don't have them at the moment. But like I said, in 2017, 2018, there were some disturbances, and we didn't have a full production. 2016 April, the commission was done, and we started production until I think December, and then we started having these problems with our local partner. So there is some interruption that happened between 2017 and 2018, but I'll provide the details of the production numbers to the evidence leaders.
The last question, it's a bit different, but just to get some flavor about something here. You mentioned that Mozambique has got a different corporate governance stroke, different business culture. I mean, I've never done business there, so can you please just highlight some of the differences between Mozambique and us here?
Okay. It's through you, Commissioner. It's totally different business operating environment, especially if you're investing in an unlisted space. And worse, if you are venturing into partnership with a family-owned business, and in South Africa here we are very advanced when it comes to issue of corporate governance. Yeah, I'm talking of an environment where they don't understand why we should have an audit and risk committee in a board, but they'll tell you that anyway, we can just hire an audit firm, they do the thing, why should we interrogate it? They don't understand why they should have subcommittees of the board, or why should the board sit every quarter to discuss the performance of the company. If I can just send you that I've made so much money into this, and then you should just believe it. So those are kind of difference. Here in South Africa, you go to a company, especially as finance investment professionals, go strict, give me audited financial statements, give me audits, give me ways of management, where is the contract, are you paying your UIF? You cannot easily get that in Mozambique. We have to go extra mile for you to get that information. I'll give you another example. Is I want to know more about you, Assistant Commissioner, that I can always go to ITC, and then all information about you comes out. That you cannot do in Mozambique, where you can just go and Google someone and then you get all the information. Those are some of the challenges that you meet. So we have to adapt. It's not an easy business environment, and it's not as the South African business environment that we have.
And do you have the same kind of sort of labor laws and pension fund contributions and those kind of things in Mozambique?
Yes, they do, but the second question is compliance. Do they comply? You see, and then if they don't comply, is there proper monitoring mechanism to find and penalties that are given to corporates that are not complying, especially companies that are privately owned? They don't have strict rules. For example, they don't have strict rules that they should have audit financials, you see, because it's a privately owned company, and all those issues. Or you must have strict rules on tax returns and so forth. That's different from public companies that are registered in Mozambique, as compared to companies that are unlisted and are probably one-man, family-owned business.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
I think one last question. If you do know, if you don't know, just say so. Do you know how long Zaid was in existence when it entered the transaction space?
Thank you again, Commissioner. And through you, like I said, maybe let me answer. I don't know.
Thank you.
Just for interest's sake, when last were you in contact with people at the project? Why I'm asking, there was a cyclone there the other day.
Correct.
Was it affected or
Correct.
was it safe?
So, I just got an update email from the operator now. They were not affected on the up north. The cyclone hit the Beira area and then it went Paro into Zimbabwe, so it didn't go up. But the last year's one is the one that affected them. But I'm not sure because I heard some power lines were also disturbed there, so I'm not sure if their electricity pipeline power lines are linked to the Beira corridor, and but I haven't had any report so far from the operator.
Just as a follow-up here, on the economic front, what triggered, I know it's been read somewhere, but what triggered the economic crisis there with like interest rates doubling and like inflation? What happened? What was the initial trigger?
Okay, thank you again, Commissioner. It's a very interesting story. Again, I'm not an economist, but I read economist briefings on Mozambique, and we often discuss this with the local partners. So, I don't know, when the elections were, when it ended, there was, I don't know, is it Kabuza or I don't know who was the president by that time. And then soon after there was elections, and then there was a new president who is currently the president now. It was around 2015, 2016. 2016. Okay. And then remember the IMF and the from what we read from the research reports, they say the IMF and the FDIs, they were pushing money there, and then later there were some corruption and fraud that were found around how they were managing those non-governmental organization funds and the FDIs, and then there was this bad publicity that went on, and then everyone just pulled out of Mozambique. And that's where the problem started. From what I read from the research, there's papers that are prepared by various economists. So there was a problem of issue of governance again around mismanagement of funds that were deployed by non-governmental organizations, including IMF, and that triggered a lot of problems in Mozambique.
Yes, because this might be linked with the finance minister, probably who has had problems here. I think. I understand.
Yeah, I won't comment on that.
Let's not comment on it.
I won't comment on that.
Let's not comment on it.
Yeah.
Let's withdraw it. Let's withdraw it.
One last question relating to paragraph 66 of your statement, where there are sessions about some news media that the PIC invested in a dilapidated plant in Mozambique that are untrue and unfounded. There have also been media reports on PIC being embroiled in litigation between. Do you know of any litigation that the PIC has been involved in regarding the SNS refineries project?
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner, and through you. I've heard about. I've read about that news media report, but I'm not sure from which news article. Mm-hmm. The litigation that was widely publicized was on the local partner in Mozambique, mm-hmm. who was under investigation by their tax authorities in Mozambique. It has nothing to do with the SNS refinery.
Okay.
That's the one that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. That will be all from the witness and myself.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Masakesa, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming to testify before us. And thanks for the good work that you have done, providing us with documentation, etc. All right.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm sure you were told that you might be called again at a later stage. I hope not, but there's a possibility. All right.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We'll adjourn until tomorrow at 10.